welcome from me also to everybody who's joined us. The reason for this event today is to celebrate the launch of this book. I thought I'd just show you there, Music, Dance, Anthropology, published by Sean Kingston Publishing in association with the RAI. And I'm very pleased to say that we've got 6 of the contributors to the volume joining me on this call today, and they're all going to talk about the chapters that they've contributed, and that's John Baily, now Emeritus Professor at Goldsmiths, Barley Norton from Goldsmiths, Jerome Lewis from UCL, and we also have with us 3 dance specialists, ethnochoreologists, Anne David from Roehampton, Maria Koutsouba joining us from Athens, and Katherine Foley from Limerick, and you will hear from all of them in due course. Now, as Haneen said, there'll be an opportunity to have a discussion and indeed questions from any of the presenters that we've got this afternoon, and that will come at the end. So we're not going to take questions as we go through, but we should have plenty of time at the end for discussion on all manner of subjects. I should say, of course, that there are another 5 contributors to the volume who were unable to join us today for a variety of reasons. 2 of those, Andre Grau and Peter Cook, have sadly passed on, as many of you I'm sure will know. And then there were other people who are either not well today. In one case was teaching, and in one case on field work. So we're not able to be joined by Martin Stokes, I've already forgotten the names of the people who aren't joining us, but we'll get to that as I go through the chapters anyway. I knew I should have made a note of everybody's name, not just the people who were on the call. So I'm going to start by introducing the volume in general. And I'll start by just explaining how the volume came about. I don't want to steal too much of John Baily's thunder, but this was arose from a series of presentations that the various authors have given at the RAI as part of the reconstituted, the activities of the reconstituted ethnomusicology committee, and also in some cases as part of the John Blacking lecture. And as I say, John Baily here is going to deal with that history in more detail in due course. Now, given the slightly ad hoc nature then in which these chapters have been brought together, it would be wrong to suggest that there's kind of an overarching or focused theme on the volume. Really, it's what we're presenting here is a series of different interrogations of the relationship between music, dance, and human culture in a variety of global contexts. But what we hope the volume does is it illustrates something not only of the historical trajectory and recent development of ethnomusicology and ethnochoreology within the United Kingdom and beyond, but also a clear indication of the current vivacity and the breadth of those disciplines. So really what we're trying to draw attention to here is the vibrancy that we see in these areas in ethnomusicology, ethnochoreology, and indeed, of course, the relationship between those 2 subdisciplines, if we can call them that, and anthropology as a whole. Now, the book itself comprises 11 chapters organized into 2 loosely conceived sections. The first section is titled Histories, Theories and Concepts, and that brings together the contributions that emphasize historical developments in the UK or elsewhere, or provide broader overviews of particular conceptual or methodological issues relating to the anthropology of music and dance. The second section, titled Regional Insights, comprises chapters that are more obviously grounded in particular geographical areas or specific periods of fieldwork. But that distinction is a little bit artificial, and I make that quite clear in the book, because the chapters in the first section often draw on personal fieldwork experience of the authors, and those in the second also provide theoretical discussions and conceptual interrogations that could be applied more generally. And indeed, some of the chapters could quite comfortably have moved from one section to the other. But I hope that in setting them out that way, that it gives some kind of guide for people as they engage with the volume as to where the emphasis is in those particular chapters. So that's why we're here, and we're going to use this as an excuse to sort of walk through the volume and talk about some of the different aspects before we get into that sequence of events. And we're just going to go through the chapters in order, because why not? There was no better way to do that. So that's what we're going to do. But before we do that, I'd just like to introduce the publisher, Sean Kingston, who's just going to say a few words about the volume from his perspective. Sean.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I really want to take the opportunity essentially to thank Stephen and the rest of the contributors, and also, of course, the Royal Anthropological Institute and its now revived Ethnomusicology Committee for giving us the opportunity to publish such a wonderful book, I think. Some of you may not know about us. Sean Kingston Publishing is my press. I'm a full an anthropologist, as it were, an anthropologist by training who found himself in publishing, and we're very small, been going since 2004 though, and we just publish anthropology. And we've had a long association with the Royal Anthropological Institute, which we're very pleased with and ongoing. And we publish interesting books. And anybody today who's interested in purchasing this particular interesting book, I'm going to be posting a discount code in the chat as soon as I've finished rabbiting on here, which please do take advantage of. Just email it to the email I'll put there and you'll get 20% off the volume. So yeah, that's all I want to say really, except I'm delighted to be here, and I wish I had a glass of fine champagne to toast this wonderful meeting and wonderful book. Thank you, Steve.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sean. Okay, so if we move through our list of contributors then, I'd like to introduce, first of all, John Baily, who I'm sure will be known to very many people here. John has been instrumental in reconstituting and chairing the Ethnomusicology Committee of the RAI over the last few years, and he's the moving force behind the seminars and the John Blacking lectures that I said about at the beginning. So John's chapter is titled The Royal Anthropological Institute and Development of Ethnomusicology in the UK. John, the floor is yours. Do please talk to us.
Fine, thank you very much. Hello everybody, and welcome, greetings from Brighton. And Steve, I want to thank you particularly for your heroic efforts in editing this volume, and also to thank the contributors of the chapters, which offer such a broad range of dance and music ethnographies. My introductory chapter to this wide-ranging collection of papers concentrates on the establishment of the RAI Ethnomusicology Committee in 1953, and draws heavily on Raymond Clausen's short paper, The Ethnomusicology Committee of the Royal Anthropological Institute, published in the journal Ethnomusicology in the States. Clausen reports on the 11th of June 1953, at a council meeting of the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, it was proposed to appoint a committee to consider what action should be taken for the encouragement of this branch of anthropology, brackets, ethnomusicology. The council agreed to the proposal and appointed the following to form a committee to examine ways of promoting the scientific study of tribal music, as they put it. The committee consisted of, I'm going to tell you who they were, briefly, Arnold Barkay, reader in Sanskrit with special reference to Indian music at SOAS. He conducted 20 years of fieldwork on music in India, Sri Lanka and Nepal. There was Herman Braunholz, keeper of ethnography at the British Museum and one time president of the RAI. There was the Reverend Arthur Morris Jones, also known as Father Jones, a missionary and musicologist who lived and worked for many years in Zambia. He was a pioneer in the study of African music and became a lecturer in African music with special reference to oral literature at SOAS from 1952 to 66. John Layard, anthropologist and Jungian psychotherapist, spent a year in Vanuatu conducting anthropological fieldwork in an early participant observational style and made extensive wax cylinder recordings of the music there. Raymond Clausen, the author of this short article, was a musician and composer and a student of Layard's. He worked extensively on Layard's recordings and also conducted fieldwork in Vanuatu. There was Otto Sampson, assistant keeper of the British Museum and then curator of the Horniman Museum, where he developed the collection of musical instruments. There was A.N. Tucker, Professor of Bantu Languages at SOAS. Quite a distinguished academic bunch. In addition, also present was John Blacking, a young Cambridge graduate in anthropology, a student of Maya Forte's with a keen interest in music, soon to depart for 15 years' work in South Africa. The first meeting of the Ethnomusicology Committee took place on the 6th of August 1953, when Layard was elected chairman, and several new members attended, including William Fagg of the Department of Ethnography at the British Museum, and Raymond Firth, Professor of Social Anthropology at LSE, and a former president of the RAI. So we can see that this committee was looked at with great interest by some very prominent figures in the field itself. The committee made a number of recommendations. I'm not going to mention any but two. It was agreed that the primary task was to seek ways of encouraging social and other anthropologists to consider ethnomusicology as a necessary part of their training and fieldwork. The committee also insisted that dance should be regarded as within the committee's scope, since it was indivisible from music. A second meeting was held in 1953, and then a period of inactivity ensued until 1956, when Raymond Firth took over as chair. I mean, you see from this is almost like an anthropological investigation into how committees work and how particular figures really inspire the work of the committee in a very positive way. Clausen concludes his statement about the committee as follows: perhaps the single most important consequence of the committee's existence is that the British universities can no longer plead ignorance about ethnomusicology, nor with the RAI's backing to the committee's work can they lightly cast aspirations on the respectability of the discipline. In 1956, the re-energized Ethnomusicology Committee focused on the need for anthropologists to make audio recordings of music in societies where they conducted fieldwork. By this time, the tape recorder was becoming the main tool for making such recordings, and a variety of machines, both for commercial and domestic use, were becoming available. This prompted the committee to compile a booklet drawing on the expertise of some of its members to advise anthropologists in making field recordings, and the result was the collecting of folk music and other ethnomusicological material, a manual for field workers, 40 pages in length, with a preface by Raymond Firth. In 1959, a very important moment occurred when Klaus Wachsmann, recently returned from 20 years in Uganda, took over the chair. Wachsmann was born in Berlin in 1907. From 1930 to 32, he studied with two of the leading figures of the Berlin School of Comparative Musicology, Erich von Hornbostel and Kurt Sachs. This was to give him an excellent academic pedigree in his later career. Leaving Berlin for the UK in 1933, he studied African linguistics at SOAS, took British citizenship, and moved to Uganda in 1937. He was appointed curator of the Uganda Museum in 1948, and he took the step of hiring as museum attendants men who were also musicians. So the museum had musicians on call whenever required to entertain visiting dignitaries or play for researching scholars. Wachsmann reinvigorated the Ethnomusicology Committee and appears to have been the driving force behind a 3-day symposium on music and history in Asia and Africa held in London in March of 1962. Some of the symposium's proceedings were eventually published as Essays on the Music and History of Africa in 1971, edited by Wachsmann, who was then northwestern in the USA. When Wachsman departed for the US and joined UCLA, Barkay took over as chair of the committee but died soon after, and it seems that the committee itself also faded away at this point. In 1965, the committee was replaced by the ethnomusicology panel. Its secretary was the eminent organologist Jerome Montague, who joined the committee a year before Barkay's death. The panel, which lasted for 10 years, was more of a discussion group rather than anything more ambitious, such as organizing conferences or planning publications. Its meetings were held in the RAI's 21 Bedford Square premises until 1971, when the RAA moved to Craven Street. This move unsettled the panel's meetings, which moved about between Craven Street, the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and various other locations. Montague writes, in the autumn term, the ethnomusicology panel followed the art panel to the Institute of Contemporary Arts. But here also there have been difficulties, due in part to noise. It's very difficult to concentrate on the subtleties of New Guinea rhythms when the soundtrack of a feature film is being played at full volume on the other side of a wall 1 brick thick. We should be very glad to consider any offers of hospitality for our meetings from any body which can offer us a reasonably commodious room, secure from traffic and other noises, and available without curfews for those occasions when the discussion catches fire. By curfew, Jeremy refers to porters announcing, "Time to lock up." The panel seemed to have dwindled away as a result of these peregrinations. The last meeting was on 20th of June 1974, when John Blacking, recently appointed to the chair of social anthropology at Queen's University Belfast, gave a talk on music, dance, and the making of man, presumably raising issues from his book, How Musical is Man, which was published a year earlier. And it was in Belfast that the next stage in the development of ethnomusicology in the UK took place. But that is another story. The phenomenal growth of ethnomusicology in the UK since the 1980s has been within departments of music, not of anthropology. Many music departments in the UK today have an ethnomusicologist on the faculty, and the growth of ethnomusicology in that context has seen perhaps its demise in anthropology departments, and I see part of the role of our committee is to reinvigorate the teaching of anthropology and ethnomusicology. So finally, this brings me to the RAI's reconstituted ethnomusicology committee. I was invited to take the chair and to nominate a number of committee members, one of the most important being Dr. André Gros, the Swiss dance anthropologist, a graduate of Blacking's department. We mourn greatly her loss, and her insistence on the importance of dance had a very important input into the committee's work. The new committee's first meeting was held on February 2013, and we have placed a strong emphasis on the study of dance, and the name of the committee is now officially the Ethnomusicology Ethnochoreology Committee. Our activities, as Steve has mentioned, has consisted over this period of 2 or 3 seminars per term. We've had a one-day conference at the Horniman Museum. We have occasional performances at 50 Fitzroy Street of music and dance. And we have the annual Blacking lectures. 2 of them form chapters in the volume Music, Dance and Anthropology, those by Martin Stokes and Peter Cook. So here I leave you with from this to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. That's terrific. And now, the next chapter in the book, in fact, in terms of the way the volume proceeds, is indeed by André Grau. She's also one of the dedicatees of the book, along with Peter Cook, both of whom are no longer with us. André passed away right at the beginning of this particular project, but she had already submitted her chapter in a draft form, and so I was happy to be able to work on it and make a published version of it. Going back to John's point about the early activities of the committee, one of the notable characteristics of that early committee, as John has already alluded to, was its recognition that, and I quote, "the study of dancing should be regarded as within the committee's scope, since it was indivisible from the music." And John's already spoken about how we've brought that up to date with the later retitling of the current committee. So André's chapter is the first of 4 in the volume overall that explicitly focus on dance. And I think this is testament to the continuing importance attached to ethnochoreology by ethnomusicologists and the mutual recognition of the centrality of the human body in the production of both music and dance. And that, of course, provides another connection with John Blacking, who maintained a lifelong interest in the anthropology of the body. I might say also, parenthetically, by the way, that my contributions in terms of covering other people's chapters will be an awful lot shorter than the authors are speaking of their own chapters here. But I will try and give the flavour as we go through. And André's chapter is titled, quote, "The Legs That Put a Kick into Anthropology, Forerunners of the Anthropology of Dance." And it provides a historical overview of the development of dance scholarship in the first half of the century, and particularly the contributions made by 3 influential figures, Beryl de Zoete, Katherine Dunham, and Zora Neale Hurston. André draws attention to the influence of Haitian and Balinese cultures on their work, showing how through their visits to and sojourns in these exotic, as then seen, destinations, they became more broadly connected with networks of anthropologists who were equally fascinated by the very different social structures prevailing on those islands. But as André shows, what distinguished the dance scholars from other anthropologists of the time was the practice-based nature of their involvement, long before the idea of doing as knowing had become an accepted methodology even within ethnomusicology, much less anthropology. As she puts it, quote, "The anthropology of dance started with practitioners deeply involved in the field," unquote. And André argues that it is the embodied nature of these dancers' knowledge, as opposed to the cerebral or intellectual arguments that might have otherwise been advanced, that in part has prevented their contributions from being more widely recognized. And her work reminds us that our ongoing preoccupations on the relationship between theory and practice and the values pertaining to those different forms of knowledge have quite long-standing roots. And that's what I draw out of the chapter that she's contributed to the volume. Following André's chapter, we have a contribution from Martin Stokes, who's one of the people not able to join us today. Martin's presently undertaking fieldwork in Turkey. I'm sure he's delighted to be there after the pandemic has made such trips so difficult over the last year and a half. Martin's contribution arises from one of the John Blacking lectures that was given over a few years ago. And he takes John Blacking's work directly as his starting point and considers how Blacking's particular form of humanism, as expressed in the seminal publication How Musical is Man in 1973, I'm sure many people will know that, how it might be reconsidered in today's seemingly more fractured intellectual environment. And the title of Martin's chapter, How Musical is the Citizen, playfully alludes to Blacking's original, while also indicating that it's the notion of citizenship, how this is conceptualized and asserted, and how it intersects with musical practice that is central to his concerns. Martin asserts that a civic instinct has long characterized ethnomusicology, He draws attention to the manner in which ethnomusicological approaches illuminate different understandings of citizenship, which is itself a flexible and negotiated concept, both among those who may be the focus of a particular research project and the global network of scholars and others who engage with its outcomes. Blacking's humanistic views were, of course, forged in a very different political climate to the one in which we now find ourselves. But Martin's suggestion that we refocus on the notion of citizenship, how this is understood and expressed through music and dance, and how those understandings illuminate broader social and political currents, is surely timely in an age when increasing importance appears often attached to various forms of national boundary maintenance. And what I mean by that is that citizenship isn't necessarily construed as being, or isn't always aligned with national boundary maintenance, and sometimes crosses over various types of boundaries, whether they are civil or national. And so looking at the way in which music and dance illuminates local understandings of citizenship may or may not align with understandings of national boundaries. Now, you'll be relieved to hear that I don't say anything more for a while now. I've got three contributors to introduce as we carry on. So first up is Jerome Lewis, colleague from UCL. Jerome's contribution to the chapter, to the volume overall, his chapter is titled Why Music Matters, Social Aesthetics and Cultural Transmission. And Jerome, the baton passes to you.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and greetings, everybody. Very nice to see so many people interested in music and anthropology. And indeed, my chapter really is trying to remind anthropologists of the significance of music and why music matters in the title, of course. And it really stems from a rather seemingly banal observation by Bruno Nettel when he was asked to comment on the universality of music, or what is universal in music. And at the end of his rather interesting chapter, he had one line, which in his usual terse and very concise style was, every social group has its music. And that is the only universal thing you can say about music. Now, many people wonder why I find that so interesting, but it's interesting because, of course, language is the other thing that every social group has. And anthropologists obsess about language and thinking about the implications of language for society and human relationships, but very, very rarely think about music. And how can we account for this universality of music? How can we start to create a space where anthropologists realize the significance of music for social lives, for culture, for society, in ways that allow them to be more engaged in music in their studies of human societies. Now, I consider music to not simply be a sound, but to be the social relationships that are involved in producing that sound. Of course, in our contemporary society, much music is enjoyed not because we produce it, but because we are able to disembody music from its production and enjoy it simply as a sound file on our iPad or whatever it is. And I think that that really deserves a bit more careful interrogation by anthropologists, because of course, for the vast majority of human history, music has only been enjoyed because people can come together and produce it through their combined actions. And if we take that more holistic view of music, suddenly anthropology has a great deal of really interesting material to look at. And of course, John Blacking and many others had pioneered this well before I did. But I'm just remaining very surprised why other anthropologists have failed to see the significance of this and so often fall prey to what Alfred Gell very succinctly put as methodological deafness. And I think our subject has been a victim of methodological deafness for far too long. And I'm very delighted that this book is now out. And I hope that it will stimulate many more people to take music much more seriously in their studies. Now, in order to try and illustrate some of the ways that music is significant to anthropology, in my chapter, I place quite a lot of emphasis on the ethnography that I did among forest hunter-gatherers in Central Africa, a group called the Bayaka. And what I think some of the key things that the Bayaka material reveals is the significance of music, as Bruno Nettel implied in that very short sentence, is the way that it constructs a shared identity. And it does so by structuring social groups in very particular ways. In order to produce the unique sound of a particular musical tradition, people need to come together in rather unique ways. And studying and paying attention to how they come together to produce the music, I think, is a very rich vein to explore. And so I try and demonstrate that through, in the chapter, through my analysis of Bayaka music making. Now, the Bayaka are well known among ethnomusicologists for the dense interlocked polyphonies that they sing, a very beautiful music, which is where each individual sings a different melody, and together, as the melodies lock one onto the other, produce a song that rises above the individual melodies and is in itself its own song, but which is only possible by the fact that everybody is singing something different. And this is, of course, quite a unique style, but is also practiced, or similar styles are practiced by other groups who sing polyphonies. And what I argue in the chapter is that this sort of singing structures the social groups by familiarizing people with particular ways of interacting. It primes people to a social aesthetic of how to engage with each other in society, in various activities, from politics to economy. And it primes them in a way which doesn't need instruction. And I think that my ethnography with the Bayaka forced me to look at this more intensely, perhaps, than some do, because in this egalitarian society, overt instruction is extremely rare, and something which is actually frowned upon because it implies a power relationship between the person instructing and the person receiving the instruction. So people will comment, of course, on achievements, but particularly in musicking, they are very particular about always encouraging through positive reinforcement rather than through negative commentaries on people's abilities. And so everyone is very forcefully encouraged to contribute as best they can according to their ability. And in that and other ways, which I will shortly briefly describe, musical participation mirrors broader social structural features of particular societies, and indeed their political order. Through musicking together, individuals transmit down the generations key cultural orientations that are crucial for their way of life, and in this case, for successful hunting and gathering in a forest environment. So the social aesthetics of the musicking group, of these group of people who come together and have to structure themselves in order to make that unique sound, is, I think, a particularly rich field and area for anthropologists to pay attention to. So how does music organize society? So for instance, in the Bayaka case, they have something they call spirit play, and this is the major musical event. And there are many, many different spirit plays. Each has its own name, its particular musical style, the particular spirits who have different characteristics and qualities to them that people call in through these musical practices. And, excuse me. And so the basic principle is that women stay as the base, the singing base that will call the spirit out of the forest, and men tend to be the ones who will organize the arrival of the spirit into camp when the singing is beautiful enough. And this mirrors all sorts of other activities in Bayaka folk biology and understandings of the relationships, gender division of labor. So for instance, men go out into the forest and they hunt dangerous wild animals whose meat they bring back into the camp, and it's women who then cook the meat and make it delicious and attractive for everybody to eat, and everyone gains, of course, nutritious food from that process. In their folk biological beliefs, it's men who bring semen from the outside into women's wombs, and women who transform that semen into babies, which they then give birth to and return to the men as these beautiful children. And so the structures, and of course I'm skipping over this rather quickly for the sake of time, the structures that organize the musicking of this group have broader reflections into areas such as the gender division of labor. But it goes beyond that. So for instance, if you think about the participation in a polyphonic song, if you are singing one melody and your neighbor is singing a different melody, you have to resist being entrained into the melody of your neighbor, because if you do and everyone entrains into the same melody, then of course the polyphony is lost. So there's a deep sort of psychological training which articulates a very particular view of autonomy, which is really important to these egalitarian people, where rather than just thinking about yourself and what you want to do and then getting on with it without a care for other people, as is the tendency in our own society, for instance, in British society, people are very clear that they want to do the thing that they want to do, that beautiful melody that they like and they want to sing, but they do it with careful consideration for the melodies that other people are singing around them. And they ensure that when they sing it, they don't just drown out the other melodies, but they insert it at just the right moment so that it fits the way that that polyphonic song is constructed. And that is a deep psychological training, a sort of autonomy of consideration as opposed to an autonomy of selfishness, and something which is very important to the efficient functioning of their society. And this indeed has economic implications, because as you walk through the forest, you're constantly moving through different landscapes. And if you're walking with Bayaka, they love to talk about the implications of that particular place for finding food. In a sense, as you walk along, you might suddenly come to a place in the forest where there are many paths crisscrossing of small antelopes. And any Bayaka hunter will know this is a place for a particular environmental melody to be sung. And so they will squat down quietly. And they will say to the antelopes that may be hidden in the undergrowth that you can't see around them, come and play, come and play. And of course, if there are antelopes in the undergrowth around, they come out within reach of the spear or the arrow, and suddenly we have dinner for the evening. So the way that, and this works for many other resources in the forest, that you see certain conjunctions in the way that you would see a conjunction in the melodic structure of the song that would allow you to stick your melody in. That same process organizes how a lot of hunting and gathering is organized in the forest. So participating in this very intensive musicking, which children will begin even before, while they're in the womb of their mother, they're hearing it after the 23rd week. And from their earliest moments, they're actually dancing before they can walk, because mums love to use their thumbs and have the kids holding onto the thumb, and then the natural leg reactions will be used as a way of simulating dancing. So children are actually learning dancing before they learn to walk. And so what I hope and then politically, actually, that was the last point I wanted to make. When they're singing like this, at any point, someone can go, hey, 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 woo, and the whole song stops. And the only obligation that the person who stops the song has is to restart it by singing out another melody as beautifully as possible, so that everybody is inspired to take the music further. And if a child has the courage, they can stop the song, just as an elder might, or anybody who's participating. And this is very much in tune with the political autonomy of these groups, where there is no reason or ability or opportunity for anybody to order other people around. And indeed, if they try, they are either mocked furiously or just abandoned and ignored. So the rules of musical participation have all sorts of implications for the way that people expect political organization to happen, and economic organization too. So musicking in this way creates a context for people to experiment and learn the key values that they have that their society holds. Sharing, for instance, is central. Everybody has to contribute. When these spirit plays are going on, everybody has to come into the central space of the camp. You can't just go and hide away in your, well, unless you're very ill or something, you can't hide away. You have to come and join the group. So they really create musicking creates a context for embodying these values. And it additionally creates this special world of time, that beautiful phrase of John Blacking's, that allows people to escape from the normal constraints of reality, to explore their mythical selves, the cultural heroes of their own society. And rather than it being a didactic experience, it's an embodied experience. As you go through your ritual initiation, you become your ancient mythical ancestors. You start to experience the social relationships and the specific key actors in those mythical narratives. They come into the initiation. So you effectively live your ancestral relationships in that present, and every generation of Bayaka has this experience, and it anchors those mythical spaces in your lived experience. So it's not an abstract cosmology that you're learning about through some wise old elder telling you. It's something that's a really lived experience that becomes your own experience, and that's something I think very special about the way that these groups raise their children and young people. So what I'm trying to answer with the ethnography in this chapter is why people make music, what music does for society, and why music is so effective at doing that. Why music in particular? And at the end of the chapter, I suggest that actually music is probably more resilient than language because of this. Its ability to repeat the same utterances again and again without tiring the listener. And this is something which enables those values to be reproduced without people being fed up of hearing them. And of course, language, on the other hand, is always novel. It's always, every utterance is slightly different to the last. And so that means that change is much easier to incorporate into language, but much less easy into music. And so in the context of these hunter-gatherers, there is an extraordinary distribution of this musical style across a huge area of Central Africa. And when you look at the genetic evidence connecting these groups, many of them haven't been in contact for tens of thousands of years, yet their musical style is so similar that when they hear each other singing or recordings of each other singing, within a few seconds, they say, they're people like us. And so I think that we really need to think much harder about music in anthropology and look much more carefully at the sorts of social relationships that emerge in order to produce the music that is associated with a particular social group. And the structures of that music are particularly good at incorporating change because they can receive new things. And because it's a social aesthetic rather than a rule, they enable people to explore those new things according to the structures of the music and adapt them or reject them according to how they fit to their feeling of what is right. Anyway, thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jerome. That's a very learned exposition of what is, I have to say, a fascinating chapter. I will move us straight on to our second dance specialist, and David, who's going to talk about her chapter titled The Voice of the Body, Revisiting the Concept of Embodied Ethnography in the Anthropology of Dance. Anne.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And firstly, a very big thank you to the RAI for not only hosting this event for us all, but for supporting the publication of the volume. Obviously, big thanks to Sean for producing such a beautiful book. And Stephen, for your hard work in the editorial role. That's never an easy task, as we know. It is exciting to be here along with my other colleagues to talk about the book chapter, which came out of my presentation at the RAI back in 2016, a long time ago now, as part of the public lecture series organised by the newly reformed RAI committee. I also want to give a warm tribute to my dear colleague and friend, the late Professor André Gros, for her work on the committee to get dance back into its place in the canon of anthropology and to approach me to give the lecture. The detailed discussion with her really helped shape the talk that I gave and the subsequent chapter, which I'm going to talk about. So titled, as we've heard, The Voice of the Body, this writing arose out of my reflections on many years of ethnographic fieldwork in a variety of dance settings where different modes of participation and engagement were possible. Following previous anthropological work, such as that written by Sally Ann Ness, Strud Williams, Brenda Farnell, and many others, I look at the centrality of bodily knowledge as a key tool for eliciting understanding and knowledge of the fieldwork situation. As Farnell puts it, and I quote, "Body movement is an arena of human lived experience that has been much neglected in anthropological research, but one in which recent significant developments in theory, methods, and new technologies offer exciting possibilities for future ethnographic research." And this, what I've written in the chapter, follows on and is developed from my previous work, which was titled Ways of Moving and Thinking the Emplaced Body as a Tool for Ethnographic Research. So to begin, in the chapter, I set out the historical precedents for this kind of participatory involvement of embodied ethnography that enables a deeper understanding of bodily cultural meanings and cultural specificities. And we see this, of course, already existing in ethnomusicology, in performance studies, and in the anthropology of dance. And then I go on to examine the new and growing interest from other disciplines such as religious studies, human geography, philosophy, phenomenology, and cognitive science, as just to name a few, of engagement with the body and its knowledge. So what do I mean by the voice of the body? If we start within the field of dance, and in particular somatic theory, we find terminologies such as somatic intelligence, somatic modes of attention, somatic knowledge, and detailed engagement with the kinesthetic bodily systems that inform our understanding, such as proprioception, which is the body's sense of where it is in space and how it moves in space, equilibrioception, which is the whole balance and vestibular area, nonioception, sense of pain, thermoception, heat, and kinesthesia, the general sense of being in the body. This is just part of that whole system. Ethnologist Deirdre Sklar talks of dropping down into the body and of a kinetic vitality in describing her danced fieldwork. Brenda Farnell terms it talk from the body, and André Gros has written of bodily intelligence. If we engage too with the work going on in cognitive and neuroscientific theory, we find new understandings regarding the body as the primary learning faculty. This research focuses on the implications of embodiment, revealing that human capabilities of doing and thinking are combined and even muddle up the mind and body, contrary to the older perceptions of their segregation, the infamous Cartesian duality. Such evidence from cognitive science is revealing that the body plays a central role in shaping the mind and demonstrates, therefore, new views of intelligence. Similarly, cognitive scientist Guy Claxton has argued in Intelligence in the Flesh that, and I quote him, "We're built fundamentally for action, not for thinking or understanding." And here he articulates how human intelligence works through the composite whole of the embodied being, suggesting again that doing is at the core of the human being and is a person's very intelligence. So clearly there has to be a note of caution here, not to reify the body in the same way that the human mind became reified in the past, but to consider this a way of rebalancing and readdressing the potential depths of understanding revealed through engaged work with our own bodies and the bodies of our practitioners in movement. Care is needed too to note cross-cultural differences, as well as to not be reliant on Western epistemologies for our understanding of what different bodies are saying. This is underlined by the work done in the Anthropology of the Senses and sensory ethnography, which notes certain Western hierarchies of the senses. I'm reminded here of Katherine Lynn Gertz's work in Southeast Ghana with the Anlo Yue people, who privilege a type of kinesthesia that views bodily balancing and that balancing as essential to living. This creates a concept of consciousness, which is called, they call seselelame, which literally means feel at flesh inside, that it's the heart of their knowing and their understanding and their living. So to illustrate this kind of survey that I've done further, and to examine the varying levels of participation that might be possible in any selected field site, I take two examples from my own ethnographic practices in dance over many years, starting with the very first fieldwork I undertook during my master's training with Professor Teresa Buckland. This was spending 8 months with a group of Polish folk dancers in West London as a fully engaged participant. My rather naive thinking at the start that I would sit and watch and write notes and possibly film was soon abandoned on the first evening. From that time, I was required to participate in all the dancing and the singing, an integral part of the practice, even when exhausted after several fast and strenuous dances with no break. Competence in learning and performing the dances allowed me to participate and to understand the Polish folk dances at a certain level. But the full participatory involvement gave an appreciation of the varying rhythmic complexities and nuances of the regional forms. It also enabled me to comprehend the energy levels required for the varied steps. Through joining the dancing, I tacitly knew the balance, the change of weight, the quick turns, the responses to partners, the inner bodily effort and energy, and the varied movement directions of the body. Through those bodily perceptions and muscle control, understanding on a deeper level was achieved. Learning through practice also brought for me a cultural shift in comprehension of these complex rhythms of the music and the different emphasis of change of body weight in these folk dance forms, and as noted by earlier ethnomusicologists in their work in learning another musical instrument. So in the chapter, in sharp contrast to this example, I turn to a second example to conclude the writing, to a fieldwork situation undertaken over many years with Hindu priests in UK temples, examining ritual performance. As a non-Hindu and as a woman, I'm not allowed to participate, but can only observe, film, and analyze the content that way. So in this instance that I talk about in the chapter, I recorded the movements of a normally unseen, private, preparatory ritual that the priest has to undergo before entering the temple. Here, as I said, as a researcher, I can only observe, film, and raise questions. So a detailed level of analysis and contextual competence is necessary to understand the ritual practice. So in this chapter, I've argued for a new lens to be focused on the significance of the embodied nature of fieldwork within anthropology, showing how neural pathways and bodily proprioception provide depths of understanding in terms of knowledge that is gathered through, by, and in bodies. All of the above indicates the complexity and the richness of the emplaced body as a tool for ethnographic research. The body does have a voice. We just need to be prepared to listen deeply, attentively, and openly in order to hear. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Anne. More great insights on embodiment. Moving swiftly on, I notice the time is passing. We'll go straight on to our next contributor, which is Barley Norton, colleague from Goldsmiths. Barley's chapter is entitled Ethnomusicology and Filmmaking. Barley.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'll keep my comments relatively brief. I know time is ticking, but it's great to see you all here today. And I'm very pleased to be part of this wonderful book. So my chapter discusses approaches to film in ethnomusicology, and it aims to stimulate debate about new possibilities and directions in the future. In a nutshell, the chapter encourages ethnomusicologists to think about creative ways of working with film as a medium of research. In order to do this, I argue that music researchers need to go beyond the idea that film and video is simply a way to document music practices. So the first part of the chapter outlines some of the ways that ethnomusicological engagement with film has been mainly dominated by what I refer to as the documentation paradigm. And by this, I mean the tendency for ethnomusicologists to treat film and video as data or evidence, which is then the basis for analysis through theory and writing. It is the entrenched division between video as a form of documentation and text as the domain of theory that I question in the chapter. I found work in visual anthropology very useful when thinking about these issues, and I draw on a lot of work by well-known visual anthropologists, including David McDougall, Anna Grimshaw, Amanda Ravitz, Chris Wright, Christian Suhr, and Lauren van Lanker. And I won't go into detail about the debates I discuss in the chapter now, but my chapter essentially aims to think about how ethnomusicological filmmaking might embrace alternative audiovisual modalities that go beyond the documentation paradigm. And by this, I don't mean to suggest that ethnomusicologists should abandon the idea of filmic documentation entirely, as it's undoubtedly productive for some types of research. For example, we might think about how the filmic documentation of performances has been used to analyze musical gesture, bodily movement, and music dance interaction, at least since the 1960s. But I argue that greater awareness of the possibilities of sound-image synchronization and montage techniques might encourage music researchers to explore critical, creative, and evocative audiovisual strategies that go beyond the documentation paradigm. My discussion of alternative audiovisual modalities focuses on two key issues. The first is sound-image synchronization, and the second is montage. And I focus on these two areas because they offer possibilities for challenging some of the central tenets of film as documentation. According to the documentation paradigm, tight synchrony between sound and image is paramount. But I argue that there is considerable potential for ethnomusicologists to explore the full spectrum of sound-image synchronization, from tight synchronization of sound and image through to total asynchrony. And in regard to montage, the documentation paradigm favors the long sequence shot, but montage techniques can be used to destabilize the realism of sequence shots. In my chapter, I discuss various sound-image synchronization and montage techniques in several films, including Unity Through Culture by Christian Suhr and Tonotto, Suya by Lauren van Lanker, and my own film, Hanoi Eclipse, the music of Dai Lam Lin. In relation to Hanoi Eclipse, I discussed how I tried to move away from the sole reliance on a text-based narrative through exploring the aesthetics of 4 songs by the Vietnamese group Dai Lam Lin. I thought of these songs as an integral part of the structure of the film. I treated music almost as if it was a character or a protagonist in the film's narrative. And rather than trying to explain the songs by using expository voiceover, I tried to explore the aesthetics and meanings of the songs through the grain of the film by evoking connections between moving images and sounds. So to wrap up this very brief summary, I make the case in my chapter that ethnomusicological arguments can be developed through the grain of the film, through the choices made in shooting and editing. And rather than trying to force films to become more like written theory, I highlight alternative approaches to filmmaking that engage with the affective, aesthetic, and experiential potential of sound film. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Sorry, mouse problems. Thank you very much, Barley. Terrific. I certainly got something I'd like to come back to on that at the end. Okay, so the next 2 chapters are by authors who are unable to join us this afternoon for different reasons. The first one is Rachel Harris from SOAS. And Rachel Harris's chapter on the soundscape's turn in ethnomusicology, sonic territoriality, and the Islamic revival across Chinese Central Asian borders draws on recent developments in sound studies to consider how a broader approach to sonic environments can provide insights into the social and political figurations they contain and the different contestations that they provoke, particularly in urban context. And she observed that, and I quote, "A focus on sound more broadly defined gave me greater freedom to think about a whole range of sounded and listening practices related to the expression and embodiment of Islamic faith and ideology," unquote. But she also shows how the Chinese state harnessed music and dance for political purposes, to counter what were seen as more extreme Islamic viewpoints, and to subjugate the Uyghur population within the Chinese state. And Rachel's work, I think, is a reminder that for all the celebratory and or seemingly positive connotations that we often attach to music and dance, there can be more complex and arguably negative associations also. And the chapter after is by Carol Pegg in Cambridge, and Carol's chapter on, quote, "performative bodies overtoning self and personhood among nomadic musicians and shamans of the Altai-Sayan mountains of southern Siberia." In this chapter, Carol returns us to the role of the body in the production of music and dance. But here, the body is not an easily delimited, bounded unit belonging only to a person. For the Altai and Sayan peoples, the body in performance is a complex, multifaceted construct, one that is intimately connected both with other bodies and with the landscapes and spirit worlds around it. Performative bodies are experienced, in her words, quote, "as multi and extrasensory, singular and plural, material and immaterial, bounded and fluid, overlapping and transformed, and of differing orders of magnitude," unquote. She shows how shamanistic performances in these areas and the timbral body music, sometimes referred to elsewhere as overtone singing or throat singing, the timbral body music that is integral to them, challenge simplistic binary divisions. They exist in a liminal space where comfortable distinctions as to what constitutes music and dance are broken down. The point is not unique to Siberia, of course, but it is well made, I think, in Carol's chapter. The words music and dance may connote rather different activities in the English language and many of those Indo-European languages connected to it, but this is not universally the case. And elsewhere, there is much less distinction made between them. Indeed, in some cultures, a division between these two activities is simply inconceivable. And the next two contributions are again from ethnochoreologists, our dance scholar colleagues. I'd like to introduce first Katherine Foley from Limerick to talk about her chapter, "To Win or Lose a Place in the Sun, Sounding Movements, Changing Contexts, and the Sean Nos Dancer." Katherine.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes, yes, Katherine.
Okay, okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Andre Gros, who was the person to invite me to speak, I think it was in March 2016, at the Royal Anthropological Institute. And so I'm just acknowledging that, and thank you to Stephen for the editing and Sean for the publishing of the book. And it's been wonderful to listen to all the other contributors here today. It was my first time hearing your lectures and the content of your lectures. And mine is, as Stephen says, one of the part of regional insights. In my chapter, I focus on a solo percussive step dance genre named Sean-Nós dancing. It is predominantly associated with contexts of sociability in the rural Connemara regions on the west coast of Ireland and the county of Galway. And Sean-Nós literally means old style. And the main characteristics of the form is the percussive play of movements of the feet in dialogue with accompanying traditional Irish music. And it has also got an upright, loose torso. So Sean-Nós dancers, they form a particular interest group and they perform as members of a network of individuals and families who have invested in Sean-Nós dancing, its development, and its embodied cultural values and aesthetics. These dancers perform socially today at private house dances and at sessions in pubs. They also perform in public spaces such as concerts and competitions, and on television and other electronic media. In 21st century Ireland, these new contexts have given rise to the dissemination of sean-nós dancing outside Connemara and indeed outside of Ireland. Individuals who like the form of the dance, the music, the rhythm, the play between the music and the dance, and the socio-cultural values embodied in the dance, they learn it as a leisure time activity for enjoyment, self-expression, and the construction of self-identity. They also learn it to belong to this particular community of practice. The chapter therefore examines how sean-nós dancing assists in community and identity construction and negotiation within a 21st century interconnected world. I examine how Connemara as a region is not only a physical, geographical location, but also a site for power struggles, displacement, resistance, and contestation. In the chapter, I look at how sean-nós dancing came to symbolize and express a regional identity and a Gaeltacht mobilization for people in Connemara. A Gaeltacht, for those of you who do not understand, is a region where the Irish language, Gaelic, is the primary language of the people. They are bilingual, they speak Irish and they also speak English. In effect, I look at how sean-nós dancing became an audio-kinesthetic identity marker of the Connemara region. From an analysis of ethnographic interviews, my research suggests that themes of kinship and community, that is, a rural community, and their associated values of intimacy and belonging, play important roles in the continuity and negotiation of sean-nós dancing. This negotiation is played out against more formal contexts of its performance, for example, at concerts and competitions, and hence issues relating to authenticity and constructions of identity prevail. Discussions center around dichotomies such as authentic, inauthentic, informal, formal, private, public, participatory, presentational, rural, urban, and the untrained and trained dancer. These discussions assist in illuminating important issues relating to traditional and contemporary sean-nós dance practices and the socioeconomic and political circumstances that have shaped them. As sean-nós dancing is an embodied practice, I explore what tradition bearers view as important embodied cultural knowledge and what attitudes and concerns they may have about its practice today and its sustainability in a world that is connected through globalization, international travel, and diverse forms of media. The paper therefore prioritizes Indigenous ways of knowing, focusing on sean-nós dancing, and it asks, what does this form of sean-nós dancing tell us about the aesthetic and cultural values that the sean-nós dancers and the people of Connemara hold dear? Embodied values that I've identified in the research include notions of naturalness, being in the moment, being on time, being even and balanced, and flow. These values I examined in relation to relevant literature, including Marcel Mauss, Stephen Feld, Judith Knowlton Becker, Mary Douglas, and Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. I also looked at them in relation to the dance itself, its characteristic style of practice and choreographic content. And I also examined it in relation to the wider cultural values of the region. In conclusion, in my paper, I've suggested that sean-nós dancing can be interpreted as an iconic representation of a particular place in which deeply held sentiments about a way of being in the world are embodied. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Katherine, for taking us back once again to embodiment, particularly, and its different forms. So moving on again then to another ethnochoreologist, this one now based in Athens, or I hope hopefully joining us from Athens. Pass on to Maria Koutsouba to introduce her chapter on local dance traditions and localized crisis, a landscape of traditional dance in Greece under austerity. Maria. Yes.
Yes, Steve. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Hope it's very nice to be with you, first of all, even virtually. Just let me know if you see my my PowerPoint. Is everything okay?
We are not seeing it yet, Maria.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I'll try.
Maybe try once more.
Now?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So you can go to your slideshow now and then, yeah. Perfect.
Thank you very, very much. Sorry. So what is this chapter about? It is about the contradiction of the socioeconomic crisis in Greece and the experienced boom of Greek traditional dance in the country at the same time. It's also in the second part with examples from the different regions all over the world. And this chapter in particular, it is about the post-2008 global socioeconomic crisis that has been labeled the Great Recession, and which inevitably affected dance and dancing both locally and international. And Greece, that was among the countries that faced this situation acutely and with a struggling economy, has been described as spiraling down. Now, in this context, one would expect that interest in Greek traditional dance will be significant. Yet the contrary was true, and dance went through a boom period. So this chapter examines this phenomenon, drawing on my personal experience, being Greek, living and working in Greece, and being involved with Greek traditional dance, both professionally and socially, and based on my research interest in the ethnochoreological anthropological study of dance, and on participation and observations made at Greek traditional dance clubs in Athens and other venues, this chapter attempts to make sense of the situation, but looking at three different issues: the socioeconomic crisis and the state of dance in Greece, Greek traditional dance and Greek society, data from dance participation and observation at Greek traditional dance clubs in Athens and other venues where dance is practiced formally and informally. Now, from the many various dance clubs, a selection was made as an example, one Greek dance club called Choropedia, meaning education through dance or dance edification. So I looked at 5 different dance events of this dance club: a New Year's cake cutting, an attendance of a music performance of Prebetica, a performance of the dance club at the end of the Greek Orthodox Carnival at the basketball court, a social dancing, and another one on an excursion on the north of Greece, a 3-day excursion for the custom of Genitsari and Boules during the carnival. So the chapter shows that this dance phenomenon, mainly in private sector, it is not motivated by nationalist sentiment as in other cases. It has not been directed by the state or the school system. It is not a sort of nostalgia of the old good days, since based on their formal words, they participate so as to lose themselves in some way. As they say, this is part of my life. I cannot imagine living without it. I can afford to pay it, but it is not only this. I don't know if I could cope with everything else if I wasn't there. Here, it's not just a dance class. It's the only time when I forget my problem. It's a good exercise, but not only this. I speak with other people, I discuss my situation, and I find people having the same problems with me. It's the only time I have pleasure, the only time I really have moments of laugh. In addition, it perhaps implies a kind of experiential continuity connected with aspects of Greek identity. And here the question is Herzberg's model of dysemia, Romneosini and Hellenism, and as we say, is still applicable even today. So to end this chapter, I contend that though Greek traditional dance is a cheap pleasure activity, economic factors are insufficient to explain entirely this phenomenon. I propose that it is because of traditional Greek dance dynamics of interaction, sharing, and social inclusion, and because of its integration of multifaceted and complex layers of Greek society, that it plays a supportive role in bringing people together during a difficult period of austerity. This is because through the spatial disposition of the dancers and the physical proximity of participants, Greek traditional dance makes manifest ideas of inclusion, unity, integration, solidarity, and mutual understanding. And before finishing this presentation, I couldn't end without saying a big thank you to my PhD supervisor, colleague and friend Andre Grau, because it was Andre who brought me to RAI to give also a research seminar on March 2017. John Baily, my co-supervisor, my PhD supervisor, who invited me to be part of this great publication, and to Steve Cottrell, who has the editing, but also the Greek lady to cope with all her English problems. So thank all of you, and we are all together here today, being physically or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. It's great to hear from you. Okay, so we will just move on to the final chapter, which is again from somebody who is not able to join us today. Many people here will know Peter Cook, who passed away at the end of last year, just as the volume was going into printing, actually. And in the same way that Andre Grau was an extremely significant figure for dance scholarship, for ethnochoreology in the UK and Europe. So I think the same might be said for Peter in terms of his position within ethnomusicology within the UK over many decades. And there were some very warm tributes paid to Peter at the end of last year in exactly the same way as there had been for Andre 4 or 5 years or 4 years previously. And so Andre and Peter are the dedicatees of this volume. It seemed appropriate from all of us, I think, to take that step. Now, Peter's chapter on music, power and patronage, the case of the King's musicians of Uganda, evidences the value of longitudinal fieldwork. Drawing on engagement with the music of Buganda, an African kingdom now subsumed within the modern nation state of Uganda, that goes back more than half a century, he shows how the previous prestige accorded to the raw musicians of the court of Buganda has become diluted over time as Uganda's sometimes difficult political circumstances have evolved. Peter's narrative is part autobiography, part musical ethnography, and part political history. Musical instruments play a central role, and the symbolic power invested in locally highly valued instruments is underlined by the fact that they were hidden in the royal tombs during the king's exile from Buganda. And just as Carol Pegg shows in her chapter how instruments in Nepal can be seen as anthropomorphic, so too were the courtly drums in Buganda described as being in mourning during the king's exile, a mourning that would not be ended until the restitution of the monarchy of Buganda, when they could be freely played once more. Now that's a very short summary on my part of what is an extensive chapter. And as I said at the beginning, it really does evidence the value of longitudinal fieldwork, because from memory, I think it covers fieldwork stretching back something like 40 years in terms of Peter's visits to that particular area of Africa. And it is a fascinating mix, again, as I said, of part autobiography, part ethnography, and part political history brought together to give more insight into this, the musical activities of this particular kingdom. And that's the final chapter in the book, and that sort of wraps up our presentations. We've not done too badly on time. We thought we'd be an hour and a quarter. We're close to an hour and a half. But we do now have half an hour left in this session for any discussions or questions that people might have. I'm just going to maximize my screen here. So we can accept questions in the chat, or I'm happy to, I think probably put your questions in the chat first, but I may well invite people, since we're in this conference mode, I'll invite people to join us, maybe to switch your audio on and actually ask the question. Now, these can be questions either directed to individuals about specific aspects that they've raised in their chapters, or they could be more generic questions about music, dance, and anthropology. I know that Jerome has to leave us at 5:45, so if you've got specific questions for Jerome, please get those in early doors. Other than that, the floor is now open, and indeed I welcome contributions from my panel colleagues as well, if they want to respond to anything that any of the rest of us have said. But this is going to be getting to the embarrassing bit of any Zoom presentation when you say, and it's now your go, and nobody says anything. But there we go. Maria has a raised hand. Go for it, Maria.
Someone has to start.
Indeed.
Okay, it was just that came up in my mind by listening to all these interesting things. And because quite many of our friends and colleagues mentioned about this, I was wondering why embodied or lived experience does not mean didactic experience. I mean, why to separate these two?
Sorry, just try that, run that one past me again, Maria. Why?
Okay. Why embodied experience or lived experience? And it's something that I got from Jerome Lewis.
Yeah.
It's not a didactic experience, but then he came again with Anne, with Katherine. I mean, how to separate the lived experience, the embodied experience, and why not to be didactic too?
So
if I understood well.
If I understand your question, Maria, you're saying that you picked up on a distinction between embodied experience and lived experience.
Yeah. No.
And then you're saying, why can that not be used as a didactic tool also? I'll bring Jerome in just a second.
Why embodied experience should be distinguished from didactic experience?
Okay, Jerome, you had your hand.
Yes, I think I can clarify that point. I wasn't saying that dance and music can't be didactically transmitted. It's just simply that in the society that I studied, that kind of instructive or instruction is just not on. It's considered rude. It's an imposition of one person over another. And because these people are so radically egalitarian, they reject anybody who seeks to impose authority over others. And that's why in that society, the role of embodied learning without didactic instruction is something which comes out particularly clearly. But it's of course not the case that people cannot learn or are forced to learn entirely in embodied ways. They can also be instructed. It's just that in that society that's considered rude and impolite. I hope I've clarified that.
Thank you, Jerome. Yeah. Any other questions or even just observations or comments from people who are on the call? We still have 72 of you. There are only 9 of us here, so that leaves an awful lot of people thinking about questions they could ask. Don't be shy.
Steve, I think Andra has raised her hand, but physically, not with the.
That's fine. I can't actually see everybody. Sorry, who was that?
Just open your microphone, I think, and.
Najwa is raising her hand. Najwa Adra. Whoops.
Najwa, there you are. Yes. Now we can see you. Yes.
Thanks, everybody. This is wonderful. So I don't need to take time to thank more. But a short comment on Maria's presentation. I was struck by this, I'm continually struck by the same kind of thing going on in Yemen. Yemen has undergone a horrible war since 2015 with bombs raining. I mean, it's just absolutely unbelievable. Since the beginning of the war, there has been a more intense involvement with dance and music and weddings, and even rituals of that had just gone by the wayside of saints visitation. And it's very, very interesting. This is happening all over Yemen. So I just wanted to say, I haven't studied it yet. I mean, it's still going on, but also fusion and innovation in both music and dancing.
Thank you, Najwa. I have a raised hand from Judith. I'll come to you in a moment, Judith. Maria, did you want to respond to that in any way?
Oh, thank you very, very much. I was pretty sure art goes up when everything goes low. Everything else go low. And I think what we're doing is art in a certain way. Thank you very much for your comment.
Judith, do come on screen. I'm not sure if you wanted to comment on that.
Hello. Yes, I'm not actually Judith Oakley, but she passed the link on to me. I'm terribly sorry. Maybe this is terribly naughty.
We demand that you introduce yourselves then.
Claire Oxby, a neighbour of Judith and an anthropologist working on the Sahara. But I'd just like to go back to that point, Jerome and Maria, the first point. Are you saying, Jerome, that the only way of learning is if you have a teacher telling you what to do in a very autocratic way? Surely one can learn from wonderful egalitarian group experiences. I wonder whether that was what Maria was trying to say. Thank you. Yeah.
Jerome.
Yes, I'm sorry if I've created confusion. No, I of course, that's exactly how people learn in these societies. They learn in age groups, supporting one another through positive encouragement, celebrating each other's achievements as opposed to criticizing or, saying you should have done it like this or you should have done it like that. People will celebrate and encourage. And I think it's rather interesting when it comes to things like music, how devastating negative feedback can be on someone's willingness to practice. And it was just a very striking phenomenon in this society that, what people do is they practice together and they just celebrate one another in that process as a way of encouraging expertise to come about. And indeed, even small children are rather extraordinarily expert in very complex musical and dance series or collaborations.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Anything else? It's that deathly silence. I was just wondering if there
is another raised hand.
Oh, there is.
Martin,
yes, sorry.
Kande.
Martin Kande. Yes, I've just seen you. Thank you, Annie. Martin, do come on.
It looks dark here a bit. Yeah, thanks so much for this opportunity to witness this wonderful book launch. And also, of course, these are great presentations that you guys have made and extensive research. It's really informing. It's not really a question, it's just a comment, like I've said. I'm a PhD student here in Durham, and I'm doing anthropology, but more so human-animal interactions is really my field of study. But I'm also a musician. I'm a musician back home, and I've been using music as a way of communicating my ideas, as a way of effecting change. And I've always had this kind of strong motivation in how to really using music as an anthropological tool to really engage with communities. Because before my PhD, during the Ebola pandemic in my country, I was able to engage with some communities despite the fear or kind of repulsive nature in some of these communities in really accommodating researchers in their communities, I was able to at least engage with some of these communities just because of my music background. And also when I went also for my fieldwork, they will also accommodate me just for the mere fact that I was a musician. So there's this kind of strong passion and moving towards this direction of seeing how I can really use music or engage in anthropology through music. And listening to Jerome's presentation, I think that to me has created a kind of solid foundation towards the path that I've really decided to choose, and really seeing how I can use music as an anthropological tool to really engage with communities. So once more, I thank you guys for this great opportunity. And I want to say, I think this book to me is going to be a manual for me. It's going to be my manual. And definitely I'm going to have it. I'm not going to waste any time to get one as my personal manual towards my dream and my aspirations. Thanks so much once more.
That's excellent. Thank you, Martin, for your very positive comments. And if the book helps you on your PhD journey, then I'm sure we will all feel that the journey, our own journey, was very worthwhile. So I hope you do get something from it. And now there's some stuff coming up in the chat here. Bear with me as I just, oh, and John it's either John, I can't see whose hand that is. Oh, it's Veronica's hand, but she's pointing at John. So presumably she's not going to let John get away without saying something then. Right, so John, I'll bring you in. There's a couple of questions in the chat that I'll pick up on in a moment, but John, do come in at Veronica's behest, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, this is a question for Barley. But I mean, I'm very interested in your kind of ideas about editing, really. And I just want to bring up a particular example. You are, of course, very familiar with the film Amir, an Afghan refugee musician's life in Peshawar, Pakistan, a film with a very short title. And I was confronted with a problem of how to edit a particular scene. If you remember, Amir is taken off by the filmmakers at his own suggestion to visit a shrine. And, you know, it starts out quite cheerfully, and he sort of catches a pigeon and says, oh, my mother was called Pigeon, and so on and so forth. But later on, he kind of starts to crack up, and he starts to cry, you know, which is, could be embarrassing, or it could be, anyway, that's how it happened. And he really owns up expresses how much he feels being separated from home, from being a refugee and so on. Perhaps I'm coming up with this because of everything that's going on otherwise. But in editing this, and we come to the end of that, and I would say, well, how can I possibly end or continue the scene? What comes next? And I discovered that the solution was Amir sitting by, but perhaps filmed 2 days before, whatever, by a gushing river. These were kind of Amir's tears. And in fact, you know, the directions were all right. The river was flowing in the right direction for his tears to be expressed. Now, my question to you is, how does that sort of fit into your notions about editing and, you know, getting away from the kind of the strict narrative and turning film into a much more creative enterprise, which is, you know, something that I really like about your work.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I mean, I think that example you've given from your own film is a classic example of how you can use editing to amplify emotional impact and the kind of to shed, in a way, moving to that water scene after his sort of breakdown really expands upon his emotional state and the particular predicament that he's in, I think. And by doing that, you kind of give the audience time to, in a way, reflect on his situation, the problems he's had, you know, being a refugee, and all those different feelings that he has about music, and why he's interested in music, and the meanings of the music for him, in a way which maybe isn't particularly explicit in terms of, you know, outlining every single kind of bit of information you could have done, but it really kind of, for the experience, it amplifies the experience for the viewer in a way which I think does, enable people to understand the music in a different way, and understand Amir and his relationship with music in a way which maybe they wouldn't have done if you hadn't done that edit. I mean, obviously I'm amplifying it, a very small edit into something quite big there, but I do think that there is potential with that kind of evocative editing technique which you use in that particular moment in the film to expand upon themes in the film, which is not done through verbal means, but it's done through kind of non-verbal means. I mean, this is something that you were obviously one of the people that highlighted this idea of using film as a medium of research many years ago in the 1980s, and in a way I'm kind of amplifying that and drawing on other anthropologists as well who have reflected on this idea of film as a medium of research in ways which is not necessarily necessarily verbal, and really to open up that possibility of kind of non-verbal exploration of music and understanding of music and the aesthetics of music, which is not necessarily a conventional theoretical approach, but it still, I think, can be understood in some ways as theorizing about music, because it highlights musical aesthetics, music experiences, relationships between people and music in a way which is quite powerful and isn't necessarily, and we kind of overlook that experiential dimension often, I think, in theorizing, which is an important part of it, I think. Hopefully.
Thank you very much. A very interesting response.
Thank you.
Thank you both for that. Okay, I've got a couple of hands up. There's a conversation going on in the chat about spaces in relation to dance spaces from Andrea. Andrea, did you want to come in and speak about that, or do you feel that Maria has responded to your question? Are you still with us?
Yeah, I with you. Sorry, I was reading Maria's answer. So I see, yes, she's saying that it happened over there. Well, you can all read it in the chat, but I was raising a question for Maria because I had this experience of the economic crisis in Spain and living in Madrid, in a big city, that dance classes and many activities are not affordable at all. I remember that there was like a big boost of people coming into squatted places that they had never put a foot in before the economic crisis, and because these squatted places and other community centers offered a very, very affordable, even free dance classes and other activities, people started to gather there, and from those spaces they created the bonds of solidarity, like starting time banks and things in the neighborhood. So yeah, I was wondering about your analysis of the spaces where the dance activities were ongoing. Thank you.
Maria, did you want to respond?
Yes, I just wrote, and thank you very, very much, Andrea, too, because that was another phenomenon over here as well. People gathering at squares in the roads, just bringing music and dance. But I chose the particular one because for me it was very, very interesting that it was a phenomenon, an activity in which people had to give some money, maybe not many, but they had to give money, which was not very easy during these years. And still they felt that it was so necessary for them, that it was the oxygen of their life by that time, that they didn't bother even paying this little money to participate in the example that I described. But what you said happened over here as well. And this is another phenomenon too. Thank you, Andrea. But Steve, I didn't cut the other one at all, so because there's a second comment also.
I think that was about that was from Bruna. I'm going to come back to that at the end if we have time. That was on a slightly different subject, Maria. So thank you both for that. I need to come to Susanna and Taku, who've had their hands up for some while. So I think if I understand the system correctly, Susanna, you were first, but I will come to you, Taku, anyhow. So Susanna, welcome.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I should have come in earlier. I really wanted to sort of back what Jerome Lewis was saying, talking about my own project, which is with dancers in Mexico City, people who do a circle dance, which when it first came to Mexico City early in the 20th century, it was very much an oral tradition. And clearly hunters and gatherers are part of an oral tradition. I mean, they're egalitarian in the way that Mexico City residents aren't, but there is no real hierarchy in this dance of the concheros. Some people have titles, but in general, they're all, if you're a dancer, you're equal with everyone else. And it's very much still, although it's been written about, the songs are written down, the music's written down, books are being published quite rapidly in the last 20 years, 30 years, let's say, it's still very much an oral tradition. Only way you can learn how to dance is with other dancers in the circle. You can't do it on your own at home. You can't do it in a party. You do it with other people, and you integrate yourself into the circle, into the group. You become part of the family in a way. I just wanted to make that comment, to add to that.
Great. Thank you very much, Susanna. Jerome, did you want to come back on anything?
No, I think that was a very appropriate comment. Thank you, Suzanne.
Great. Thank you very much. Taku, you've been waiting patiently. Do speak to us. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much. Can you hear me all?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. I'm Takuzwa. I'm a master student, Choreomundus. And this was a very, very enriching session. I've really learned a lot. So mine is just more of a comment. As I was following these, presentations, I learned that this book, indeed, it's to me, it's an oxygen or it's oxygen to my studies. As a student who is also trying to apply for PhD, I learned a lot of theoretical and epistemological frameworks in the presentations that I got, and I think if I get the actual book, I will really learn a lot from my proposal up to the end of maybe the course if I happen to get the chance for PhD. So maybe my request would be how I can get a copy of this book and where exactly. I know I have got my professor who is here. David, we are going to meet very soon in January in UK. So yes, I just know how I can get a copy.
Your Professor Anne, is that right? Okay, I'm going to bring Anne in just a second. However, if I remember correctly, Sean, you put, I don't know if Sean is still with us, but I think Sean put something, oh no, he didn't. He's given the code.
I'm still here, Steve. So
go on. How should Taku get in contact with you?
Well, if he can see my messaging chat there, essentially we have
there's an email.
An email.
Yeah.
orders@seankingston.co.uk. You just send us a message, a plain old email message there with that code. You'll get 20% off. We'll ask you where you are in the world, because we need to calculate shipping. And then we can sort you out that way. We'll send you a link to pay by credit card or something like that. Or if you're a student and you may not have a huge amount of money for, although oxygen to your studies, it is an academic hardback. So I understand it's not the cheapest for people. Harass your librarian. Harass your librarian. Harass Anne. Harass your lecturers. All to buy copies, and then you'll have access to it that way.
Okay, yeah.
And I've just pasted Sean's message again a little bit lower down the chat, so the email is there. Anne, did you want to come in?
I just wanted to add that our wonderful librarian has in fact been here for the whole of the 2 hours.
Indeed.
And
Russell is there waving and laughing behind a mask, and she's already promised to buy the book, Taku, look.
I think she's going to get hold of the e-copy, because we've got restrictions on purchasing at the moment because of financial constraints at the university. But anyway, she's on the case. So,
and I think I
hope we'll have it. If not, my copy will be shared with everyone.
Just to make a message that the e version is coming out in a month or so, Sean, is that right?
Yeah, the e version will not be available directly to the public, as it were. It's going to go through ProQuest, which most academic libraries have accounts with.
Yeah.
And it's this sort of e-library system where they can sort of, depending on the number of users that want to look at it, they get charged a different amount. It's not there yet. It'll be probably a month, maybe 2 months, but it will get there.
Terrific. Anne, is your hand up again? Yep.
I just wanted to raise a comment going back to John's presentation, if I may. Is that a good time to do that?
Yeah, sure, of course.
I think the history of the RAI Ethnomusicology Committee is absolutely fascinating. And John, thank you for setting it out so clearly and so in such an interesting way. I note too that Andre has in her chapter remarked on two of the women on the committee, because obviously there were a lot of men at that time, staunch members of the committee. And those two women, Maud Karpeles, who of course was very famous within the collection of English folk dance, and Beryl de Zoet, who worked extensively in Indian dance and also Balinese. I think they were really key as well. So it's great to have them mentioned and their kind of role given a tribute in these two chapters.
Terrific, thank you, Anne. I don't see any other questions at the moment. Oh, another waving hand, Veronica.
Well, I think I'd like to say something about the subject of emotion has come up in terms of the how to cope with very difficult social contexts with austerity and difficulties. And it was very, very nice to see Najwa and heartwarming to hear that in Yemen, where the situation has been so difficult, people are also using dance to come together and kind of lighten their hearts, really. And I just wanted to say how sad it made me feel about the situation in Afghanistan, where women are so completely constrained, where music is so completely outlawed, and dance is an unthinkable activity, and artwork, amazing artwork, graffiti work and everything has been erased from the walls, and art has absolutely no place in the Taliban vision of how one should live. So I wanted to make that point about, if the authorities are really cracking down on what people can do out in public, then that is not at all a possibility, which is heartbreaking for people. They really, really feel, that they can't live without music or probably dance as well. Just that is a very important part of their culture. Also, a little bit connected, I wanted to say how fascinating the two chapters by people who haven't been able to present their chapters specifically about, from my point of view, interesting about musical instruments. Carol Pegg's chapter and Peter Cook's chapter. You did mention, Steve, how very interesting they are about the power of musical instruments and their enormous importance in both those different contexts. But also the fact of emotion. This is where I'm linking it up. Carol says that the instruments belonging to shamans actually have emotion. They are they have personhood, and they have emotion, and they communicate emotion, and that if you're feeling down and you play your instrument can cheer you up, and if your instrument feels sad and you play it, then it can cheer up, you know. So that was a fascinating insight. And then, of course, I also picked up very strongly on the drums, the royal drums being in mourning while their king and patron was out of power. You know, so I've thought these comments about significant artifacts and the ethnography of them were very, very valuable in this wonderful publication.
Indeed, they are. I agree, they are two very powerful chapters, and it's a great shame for different reasons that neither Carol nor Peter were able to present them tonight. And I can imagine also that they were particularly resonant for you and John, given the recent political history of Afghanistan. I'm sure we all understand how difficult that would have been for two of you with your friends and connections that you've made over there over many years. And particularly relating to
years of progress and rebuilding after the previous Taliban regime.
Yeah.
You know,
seems to have gone up in smoke. Yeah.
One.
Still, on all of that, Jerome, I think is just signing off. Thank you very much, Jerome. Really appreciate your contribution. That's terrific. I think I will begin to wrap it up there for everybody. So it's really good. Thank you to everybody who's attended this afternoon, and to my fellow contributors and panelists. Thank you very much. It's been a very stimulating session, and it's been a bit of a long journey on this book, but we got there in the end, and I think it's worth the wait. So thank you all very much. Anine, is there anything else to say, or for you wish to say?
No, I just want to say thank you as well from the RAI for everybody who joined us, and to our wonderful speakers tonight.
All right, that's great. Thank you all very much. Good night, safe travels wherever you're going. Thank you, goodbye.